The last couple of days, you guys have really enjoyed my videos about quarterback breakdowns. I did one talking about the 2025 NFL quarterback class, and yesterday I did a video talking about 10 quarterbacks I think should enter the transfer portal. Today we're going to do another video somewhat similar, as I'm going to talk about 10 quarterbacks in college football right now who I believe are fringe NFL quarterback prospects. We'll find out a lot about these guys over the next couple of months, as some of them might get invited to the combine, some might come back to school, some might transfer, and some might have a meteoric rise in the last month that puts them back into the NFL draft discussion. These guys in my eyes are all fringe NFL prospects, as they probably aren't going to be future franchise quarterbacks, but could find their way into those later rounds or as an undrafted free agent. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about 10 fringe NFL quarterback prospects. Okay, so the first guy I want to do is my dude Brady Cook. Brady Cook has gotten a lot of hate over the last couple of years, as Mizzou fans at times haven't appreciated him, but also at times he's just not looked all that good. After being a 3-star recruit coming out of St. Louis, the kid who dreamed about one day being a Mizzou quarterback would get his wish. In 2021, he would start their bowl game against Army, but they ended up losing. In 2022, he took over as a starter, throwing for 2,700 yards with 14 touchdowns and 6 more scores on the ground. 2023 would be Cook's breakout season, as last year he threw for 3,317 yards with 21 touchdowns and then 8 more scores on the ground. That's where he started getting a little bit of NFL attention. Cook may not have the perfect measurables, but he was pretty athletic, had a lot of the mental intangibles, and did have decent stats. He also won a lot of games for Mizzou last year, so if he could carry that into 2024, he could maybe play his way into that third round status. Except this year, Cook has not been all that good. He's only thrown for 1,600 yards with 7 touchdowns and only 4 more rushing scores on the ground. Cook has been absolutely banged up this year, and Mizzou's offensive scheme has seemingly changed a little bit as well, as he's not really been able to connect on the deep ball or medium-sized throws, and right now it looks like he's trending towards being an undrafted free agent, and I don't think has much of a chance of getting onto a roster. Right now he's also dealing with an injury as he was out versus Oklahoma, but Cook is very athletic for a quarterback, seemingly is mentally super tough, and has some of the intangibles and physical measurements to be an NFL guy, but I just don't know if he's going to put it all together, and his stat line has not been great this year, and injuries are not helping him. Coming out of the state of Texas, Haynes King was a huge deal. He was the son of a high school football coach, and after becoming nearly a 5-star recruit, he would decide to go to Texas A&M. After Kellen Mond graduated, he would take over as the starter in 2021, but would get hurt just a couple of games into the season. In 2022, he also was the starter, but was absolutely terrible, and was eventually benched in favor of Max Johnson. Looking to revitalize his career, he would end up transferring to Georgia Tech, where last year, he ended up throwing for 2,800 yards with 27 touchdowns, and also ran for another 10 scores on the ground. He did struggle as he had 16 interceptions, but he also helped bring Georgia Tech football back onto the map. So far in 2024, he's actually gotten a little bit better. He's completed 72% of his passes from 61% last year, only has 1 interception, and currently has 16 total touchdowns on the year. He has battled an injury over the last couple of games, but Haynes King is now playing his best football in my opinion, and could be playing his way into the end of the draft. I know he was one of the most athletic quarterbacks in the country, and if he can finish the year with a couple of big games, maybe even upsetting Georgia, King could play his way into a 6th or 7th round draft pick and show off his insane athleticism at the combine. To me, he's a fringe NFL draft prospect, and Haynes King deserves a little bit more love. Another guy who I feel like nobody is talking about is Will Rogers. Coming out of Mississippi, Rogers was a 3-star recruit and would decide to go to Mississippi State. He'd play the back half of the 2020 season before exploding in 2021. Rogers threw for 4,700 yards with 36 touchdowns in 2021 and followed that up in 2022 with 3,900 yards and 35 touchdowns. To be fair, Rogers wasn't an air raid offense, but 2023 was tough on him. He only had 1,600 yards with 12 touchdowns, and it was a very dysfunctional season in Starkville. Looking for a change of pace, he would decide to transfer over to Washington with head coach Jedd Fisch and take over for Michael Penix. So far in the year, Will Rogers has thrown for 2,300 yards with 13 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, and while his numbers are nowhere near his 2021 or 2022 status, he's playing in a more NFL-like system. He has a crazy arm and also has a good body of work. I don't expect Will Rogers to be a 1st or 2nd round guy, but I could see a world in which he plays his way into the back end of the draft, or at least competes for a roster spot on an undrafted free agent deal. You can't really teach experience like Will Rogers has, and he has a good arm, and is also 6'2", so not terribly undersized. Will Rogers needs to prove it these next couple of games, but he's honestly a fringe quarterback prospect going under the radar. Another dude who's a fringe NFL prospect is Tahn Green. Coming out of Lewisville, Texas, Tahn was going under the radar and would eventually sign with Boise State. Some called him Vince Young 2.0, which was definitely a stretch, But in 2022, he broke out with 2,000 yards and 14 touchdowns and was getting significant hype in 2023. Sadly, Green would have a tough season, as he only threw for 1,800 yards and 11 touchdowns, and decided he needed a change of pace. He would decide to transfer over to Arkansas, where he has now been starting in the SEC, and so far this year, he's on pace to have his best season yet. He's thrown for 2,200 yards with 11 touchdowns, and also has 400 rushing yards and 5 scores on the ground. He notably upset Tennessee, and at 6'6" with a strong arm and good legs, Jaylen definitely looks like he could be NFL, but he needs a lot more development. I think he has one more year of eligibility to come back, but in my opinion, Tahn Green is definitely worth a flyer on, because he's one of those guys who fits the NFL mold, but just needs more time. Another great story is Riley Leonard. Coming out of the state of Alabama, Leonard was both a football and basketball star and was one of the top athletes in his recruiting class. Still though, he went under the radar and was just a 3-star player and decided to commit to Duke. Mike Elko got a hold of him in 2022, and in his first year as a starter, Leonard won 9 games and threw for 3,000 yards with 20 touchdowns, and also ran for 700 yards and 13 more. In 2023, Duke got some national attention, but Riley Leonard would struggle with an injury. He did combine for 16 touchdowns last year, but he was on and off the field because of that injury, and would decide to transfer to Notre Dame for his final year, as Elko went down to Texas A&M. Notre Dame was trying to find a more dual-threat player compared to Sam Hartman, and Leonard has done exactly that. He's thrown for 1,600 yards with 9 touchdowns, but more importantly has 600 yards and 13 scores on the ground. At 6'4", Leonard has decent size, he's also very quick and can run the ball, but his arm and passing definitely needs a lot of work. That, in my opinion, is what's holding Riley Leonard back, as he seems to be a good game manager who really fits what Notre Dame's trying to do right now, but in terms of an NFL fit, I don't really know. I consider him a fringe NFL prospect though because of how athletic he is in both his potential and ability to run the football. By now we all know the Jaylen Daniels story. He was a 2-star recruit coming out of California, and Les Miles decided to bring him in on a flyer. Daniels would play a little bit in 2020, having 1 touchdown and 4 picks, and would eventually take over by the end of 2021, helping them have that crazy victory over Texas on that 2-point conversion. Daniels would take over as the starter in 2022, throwing for 2,000 yards and 18 touchdowns with 7 more scores on the ground, but unfortunately, he was made of glass and ended up getting hurt, and Jason Bean had to take over. In 2023, the same thing happened, as once again Daniels got hurt after 12 total touchdowns, and he decided to come back for 1 more year. So far in 2024, it has been somewhat of a disaster for Daniels, as he's thrown for 1,800 yards with 13 touchdowns and 9 interceptions, and has only completed 56% of his passes. He also has 6 more scores on the ground, but Jaylen Daniels has a really good arm and is also pretty athletic. He also showed a lot of flash back in 2022, so that's why I consider him a fringe prospect. If Jason Bean can find his way into being a fringe draft prospect, I think someone will take a chance on Jaylen Daniels. He's got too much going for him. He's also slowly starting to figure things out at Kansas, but yes, he's had a terribly disappointing season, but he still deserves a chance, I think, at an undrafted free agent deal. Another guy who's had somewhat of a disappointing season is Kiron Drones. Coming out of Houston, Texas, Drones is a 4-star recruit and originally signed to go to Baylor. Except after just a little bit of time there, he would transfer to Virginia Tech, where he started out as the backup last year. Drones would eventually take over, throwing for 2,000 yards and 17 touchdowns, and also rushing for 800 yards and 5 more scores on the ground. Drones was given a significant amount of hype going into 2024, but so far, he's been somewhat disappointing. While he has completed 61% of his passes, Drones has only thrown for 1,500 yards but 10 touchdowns, and has 300 yards and 6 touchdowns on the ground. His decision-making has been questionable. Virginia Tech's been one of the more disappointing teams in the country this year, and some really wonder if he has that much NFL potential. Still though, he's kind of what the modern NFL is looking for, as he can manage a game, has a good enough arm, and more importantly is super athletic and can run the football and make plays. I think Drones is definitely a fringe NFL prospect and most likely comes back for 1 more year, but he's definitely worth at least mentioning and being put on the radar. It feels like Jeff Brom was literally doing the same exact thing. Last year, he brought in 6th-year quarterback Jack Plummer, and this year he has another 6th-year quarterback in Tyler Shough. After originally spending time at Oregon and Texas Tech, Shough came to Louisville for 1 final year. So far, he's thrown for 2,500 yards with 20 touchdowns and 5 picks, and also has 1 score on the ground. Shough lacks a lot of mobility, but at 6'5" with a strong arm, he is slowly getting back on the NFL radar. He's done a good job taking care of the football, is putting up big yards, is pretty accurate, and kind of looks like a prototypical NFL quarterback. Jack Plummer found his way into an undrafted free agent deal, and Shough is much better than him, which is why Shough deserves to be on the list, and I think there's a chance that he could get drafted late. He also is a lot older and more experienced, and the NFL is totally fine with guys like that. Okay, so the biggest flyer on this list is Tommy Melet. Coming out of Butte, Montana, Melet is currently a senior quarterback for Montana State. He's been starting for them over the last 3 years, as in 2022, he had a crazy year. He had nearly 2,000 yards passing and 1,000 yards rushing, and combined for 23 touchdowns. In 2023, it was pretty similar, as he was both a threat through the air and on the ground, and so far in 2024, we're getting the best season we've ever seen out of Tommy. Currently, he's completed 70% of his passes, has thrown for 1,700 yards with 19 touchdowns, and only has 1 interception. Montana State is also undefeated, and he's ran for 10 scores and nearly 600 yards on the ground. Every year, there's always 1 or 2 FCS quarterback prospects that either gets drafted late or goes undrafted, and Tommy Melet definitely feels like that. Also, I really hope I'm saying his name right. He is a little bit undersized and plays at the FCS level, which will hurt him, but he's a really good quarterback and will definitely get invited to an NFL team in some capacity. Okay, so the last guy we're going to talk about is Will Howard. I'm honestly surprised he's not getting more attention, as coming out of Pennsylvania, he was a 3-star recruit who went to K-State. He started on and off in 2020, 2021, and 2022, before taking over as the full-time starter in 2023. In his first full season starting, he threw for 2,600 yards with 24 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, while also running for 9 more scores on the ground. Will Howard had a really good season for them and would decide to transfer. Many thought he'd go to USC, but instead he went to Ohio State, and some were very skeptical of this, but ultimately Howard has worked out so far this year. With the Buckeyes, he's completed 74% of his passes, which is great, has thrown for nearly 2,300 yards, has 22 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, and also 6 more scores on the ground. He's also led the Buckeyes to a really solid start, is starting to become a leader and showing a ton of mental grit, is completing the ball, is throwing touchdowns, is taking care of it, and is playing for a high-profile team. Usually that's enough to become a big-time draft prospect, but for now it seems like Will Howard is really going under the radar and no one's really talking about him. He's also 6'4" and has shown that he can run the ball, so in my opinion, Will Howard is the most underrated quarterback prospect in the country right now. If he continues to finish out the year strong, I think he could play his way into being a day 2 pick and at least giving himself a shot at being a future franchise quarterback. We'll have to wait and see, but Will Howard has definitely impressed me more than I thought he would. So yeah, today we talked about 10 quarterbacks who I believe are fringe NFL prospects, talked about who they were, what they bring to the table, and what I think will happen to them. But what do you guys think? What do you think of these 10 guys on the list? Who is a quarterback I should add to my list, and what other topics should I do next? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out one of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.